Cops kill. Black man's dog. Unaware. He is the most lethal Delta Force commander ever. They didn't see a hero. They only saw a black man with a big dog in a rich neighborhood. A gripping and dramatic story is unfolding. If you want to hear what happens next, hit like and subscribe to Black Strength Stories so you don't miss a single powerful, emotional twist. That afternoon, the sun cast long shadows across the million-dollar rooftops of Northern Springs. A gated, eerily quiet neighborhood where every car gleamed, every lawn was perfectly trimmed, and every glance carried judgment the moment anything looked out of place. Harvey Bruce knew that. He had lived there for nearly 3 years, in the $1.2 million home he bought with his salary and overseas high-security protection contracts. But even though every brick was paid for with his sweat and blood, the neighbors still looked at him like he didn't belong. Harvey had just returned from Syria after 6 straight months, not for a vacation, but a mission to protect a high-ranking official in a foreign government, where every day was a roll of the dice with death. At 45, he was a former Delta Force commander, one of the most elite and lethal units in the U.S. military, 3-time honoree at the Pentagon, 11 hostage rescue operations. But in Northern Springs, none of those accolades meant more than the color of his skin. Beside Harvey was Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd, trained to military standards, who had crossed war zones with him in Fallujah and Kabul. Rex was Harvey's second set of eyes, loyal, alert, and so steady he never needed a taut leash. That evening, the two were merely walking down the same street they'd lived on for 3 years, past the same trees they knew by name, and the same shuttered windows that had never once opened to them. When the Northern Springs Police Department patrol car began slowly trailing behind them, Harvey noticed. Things were shifting. No sirens, no flashing lights. Just that quiet way they followed, like a predator studying its prey. Then the car stopped. 2 officers stepped out. Caradoc Chapman, tall, with eyes cold as stone, known as the initiator in controversial arrests. Orson Collins, more reserved, but with a piercing gaze that lingered longer than it should when looking at a black man. "You live here?" Chapman asked, one hand resting on the waistband where his Glock 22 sat. Harvey looked him straight in the eye, calm, and nodded. He wore a military jacket, the Delta Force emblem stitched clearly on the shoulder. Yet Chapman still stared at him like it was counterfeit. Rex froze, raising one paw as if he'd sensed the threat before it arrived. Collins glanced at the dog. "This dog trained to attack?" Harvey gave a dry smile, voice steady. "No. Rex is trained to protect. He obeys commands, never initiates aggression." "Better be," Collins muttered, his tone dripping with doubt. Harvey handed over his ID, name, address, valid information, dog license, and even Rex's certified military training papers. Chapman took it, barely glanced at it, then smirked. "Funny. Been living here, and the neighbors say they've never seen you." A jogger passed by, paused for a second, saw cops and a black man, then kept going. No questions. No concerned glance. Harvey understood exactly what was happening. Those seemingly harmless questions weren't for verification. They were meant to force him to justify his presence. To Chapman and Collins, Harvey wasn't a former elite commander who had rescued dozens of hostages in war zones. He was just a black man walking his dog through a successful white neighborhood. And to them, that was reason enough to doubt. Harvey subtly tightened his grip on Rex's leash, signaling him to stay quiet. A gust of wind swept past. The storm hadn't hit yet. But he knew. This wasn't going to end here. Harvey remained calm, as he had done hundreds of times on the battlefield, when bombs fell just steps away, or when the enemy pointed a gun at his head. But this time was different. Not in the deserts of Iraq, not in the dark alleys of Kabul, but right here in Northern Springs, the quiet neighborhood he called home. "Turn around. We need to conduct further checks," Chapman ordered, his voice sharp as steel, leaving no room for a reply. Harvey, used to following protocol, slowly turned, raising both hands. No sudden moves. No resistance. At that moment, Orson Collins stepped forward without warning and yanked Harvey's right arm back as if restraining a dangerous criminal. The rough grip on his wrist made Harvey's shoulder jolt. It wasn't the pain that startled him. It was Rex's reaction. Just a few seconds, but enough for everything to collapse. Rex growled softly, not a threatening snarl, but a warning, and stepped forward toward Harvey. He didn't lunge, didn't bare his teeth, just stood between his master and the officer, using unnecessary force. It was a response exactly as trained. Rex had done the same in Syria when a Taliban gunman approached with nothing but a camera. Every step of it had been drilled into him since he was a pup, under the most rigorous military conditioning. "Control the dog," Chapman shouted, his hand drifting toward the grip of his gun. But Harvey raised his left hand, calmly commanded, "Rex, hold!" Rex's tail stopped wagging. All four paws froze in place, eyes still locked on Collins. No growl, no threatening movement. But it was already too late. The gunshot rang out, a sharp, cold crack that ripped through the silence. Rex jerked, then collapsed, his heavy body hitting the paved sidewalk with a thud. His eyes remained open, filled with panic. Blood began to seep from his left chest, spreading quickly into a dark red pool beneath Harvey's feet. "No!" Harvey screamed, his voice tearing through the chilling quiet. He dove down, kneeling beside Rex, arms wrapped around the trembling body. No doors opened. No neighbors came running. No one called 911. Collins stepped back, still holding his gun, breathing heavily but showing no remorse. Chapman, standing behind, shook his head and scoffed. "I told you it was a threat." Harvey's hands trembled as he stroked Rex's head. The black and brown fur was soaked with blood. He had once treated battlefield wounds on teammates during the final 5 minutes before a medevac arrived. But this time, there was no medic bag, no rapid response team, just a dying dog in his arms. "Hold on, Rex. You're strong, buddy," he whispered, fighting back tears. Rex's breathing slowed, a raspy wheeze, then silence. Harvey leaned down, pressing his forehead to Rex's. No heartbeat, no life force. A living being, a comrade, a friend, shot dead because of irrational fear and racial prejudice. In that moment, Harvey heard nothing, saw nothing. The world went utterly silent, not from shock, but because inside him, a gate had opened, a gate to a place he had hoped never to return. The place of cold, precise, and relentless rage. Orson Collins pulled out his radio, calling back to HQ. Chapman began flipping through documents as if nothing had happened. No apologies, no check on Rex's condition, no concern for the innocent life just taken. Harvey remained kneeling, blood on his hands, eyes staring into the void. But inside him, a buried instinct had awakened. And this time, it wasn't to save someone. It was to start a war. A war he didn't want, but one he had to fight. For Rex, for justice, for himself. The sound of the gunshot still echoed in Harvey's head as his body was pinned down on the sidewalk. His left knee slammed against the rough concrete, and his right arm was twisted back brutally. His blood-covered fingers, not yet cleaned after cradling Rex, were now crushed by cold steel cuffs. Harvey didn't resist, didn't react, didn't scream like so many wrongly arrested men had done before. He just stared into the void, his mind silent. But that silence only made Chapman more agitated. He leaned down, snarling each word close to Harvey's ear, like a predator savoring the moment. Just lie there and wait. In this neighborhood, no one's coming to defend you. Mutt. The security camera on the street lamp captured it all. A middle-aged black man pinned face down on the pavement by 2 armed officers, beside the body of a bleeding dog. But no one stepped out from the neighboring mansions. No windows opened to call his name. No phone dialed 911 to report the excessive force. Northern Springs remained quiet, as if it had never witnessed a crime. Harvey was dragged into the patrol car and shoved into the back seat. His knee was still bleeding, hands were numb. Rex's blood was still smeared across the sleeve of his military jacket, and even on the left side of the police car's windshield. A cruel, senseless scene, yet to the badge wearers, it was just standard procedure. At the Northern Springs police station, Harvey was held in a cramped interrogation room. No lawyer, no clear explanation of why he was being detained. The clock on the wall read 7:12 p.m. He had been sitting there for an hour. No one checked on him, no one brought water, no one allowed a phone call. But everything changed when Breonna Dawson showed up. Breonna, Harvey's younger sister, was a civil rights attorney with over 60 successful lawsuits against police misconduct in 3 major states. She had just flown in from Chicago the day before to visit her brother. And when a neighbor called her, saying, "Something's happened," Breonna arrived at the station with a 6-centimeter thick folder in hand. "Take me to the duty commander. Immediately." Her voice rang out like a command. When the receptionist hesitated, Breonna slammed the folder onto the desk. Harvey Bruce, former Delta Force commander, recipient of the Army Distinguished Service Medal in 2012, 2015, and 2018. He saved 9 American engineers from a Taliban siege. You're holding a hero, not a criminal. The interrogation room door burst open less than 3 minutes later. Harvey lifted his head and met his sister's eyes. No tears. No pity. Just the fierce determination of a woman well accustomed to confronting injustice. Breonna turned to Chapman, who had just stepped in behind her, and nearly roared. "My brother has lived in this neighborhood for 3 years. He pays nearly $3,000 a month in property taxes. And you? How many civil rights cases are currently pending against you at the DOJ, Chapman? You think black people can't walk their dogs in million-dollar neighborhoods?" Chapman said nothing. Collins stood behind, pretending to check his phone. Harvey was released just 23 minutes later. No apology, no official paperwork, no written statement. They tried to erase the incident, but Breonna had already photographed everything, from the blood on Harvey's hands, to the injury report, to the aggressive details of the arrest. Back home, Harvey said nothing. He changed out of his bloodied clothes, washed his face, and silently hung Rex's leash on the wooden hook by the door. Empty. Cold. Beneath that hook, on a small wooden shelf next to an old photo of him and Rex at an Iraqi base, sat a familiar object. A Beretta M9, his companion through 17 special operations. That night, the lights in the house stayed on. Harvey didn't sleep. He sat by the window until morning, eyes fixed on the quiet neighborhood. In his mind, there were no other images, only 2 names repeating with a chilling rhythm: Caradoc Chapman, Orson Collins. And from that moment on, the battle was no longer if, but when. There is a kind of law that's never written in books, never taught in academies, and never mentioned in courtrooms. But for men like Harvey Bruce, who had commanded hundreds of covert operations, who made life or death decisions in under 0.8 seconds, that law is the only thing that remains when formal justice shatters. Harvey didn't need to say it. He acted, silent like a lone predator, detached from the pack, living by instinct and discipline. And his first target was Caradoc Chapman. For 3 consecutive nights, from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m., Harvey quietly built a surveillance dossier down to every detail. He tracked Chapman's silver GMC Yukon SUV, discreetly parked in a shadowed corner near the Dusty Barrel Bar on West Lane, a rundown place with broken lights, creaky doors, and garbage scattered across the parking lot. Harvey didn't need camouflage. He had learned to dissolve into the darkness back on the battlefield in Mosul, where he once lay motionless for 7 hours just to fire a single shot. And this time, he carried no gun. He brought 2 black leather gloves, a collapsible baton, and a face cloth he once used during Operation White Wolf at the Pakistan border in 2016. On the 4th night, precisely at 12:38 a.m., Chapman stumbled out of the Dusty Barrel, drunk as always. He cursed, called someone on the phone, probably a bar girl, then shoved open the SUV door, unaware that Harvey was less than 12 steps away, hidden in the shadows of a rusted shipping container. When Chapman turned his back, Harvey glided forward like a ghost. Not a sound, not a wasted breath. Just 3 strikes, the first to the right wrist to knock the keys from his hand, the second to the ribs to drop him to his knees, and the third, a powerful blow to the nape, rendered Chapman unconscious instantly. Chapman's heavy body collapsed onto the gravel-strewn cement, wheezing and trembling. But Harvey didn't leave immediately. He bent down, pulled up his mask, and whispered into the man's ear. "Who are you?" Chapman gasped in a panic. "I'm the man you should have never touched," Harvey replied, eyes colder than Damascus steel. He passed out. But Harvey didn't kill him, didn't shatter his bones, didn't leave a mark. He knew his limits exactly, and he knew fear would do the rest. Before leaving, Harvey reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a square folded piece of paper, and tucked it into Chapman's chest pocket. On it were 6 words, handwritten in red ink. "This is just the beginning." Harvey exited the lot through the back, cutting across an abandoned warehouse zone where no cameras worked. He had been 1 step ahead, measured every lamppost, calculated every blind spot, even considering the wind direction, so that if Chapman had screamed, the sound wouldn't reach the bar. At dawn, Chapman was found by a delivery worker. He was taken to the hospital with soft tissue injuries to his ribs, a hematoma on his shoulder, and a large contusion on his head. But more significant was the vacant stare in his eyes, as if he had seen something far beyond comprehension. Back at the precinct, Chapman stayed silent. No report, no complaint filed, no hunt for the stranger. Because deep down he knew this wasn't some mugger, wasn't some civilian. It was something else. Dangerous, tactical, and terrifyingly precise. That night, Harvey came home, washed his hands in cold water, and quietly dried them on Rex's old towel. On the wall, the dog's photo still hung there, tongue out in a cheerful grin, loyal eyes gleaming in faded golden light. He looked up. Another name came to mind. Orson Collins. His turn had come. Unlike Chapman, who acted like a brainless thug, Orson Collins was more cautious. After the incident where Rex was shot, he began carrying a sidearm even when off duty, installed a dash cam in his car, and changed his daily commute route. He knew he might be under surveillance, but what he didn't know was his adversary wasn't just watching, he was reading his mind. Harvey had spent 4 days reconstructing Collins's entire routine. He lived on the ground floor of a rental apartment complex in Edgewater, more than 12 miles from the police station, near an old train depot. Every morning, Collins bought coffee at Brody's Beans, a small shop at the end of 8th Street, open from 6:30 a.m., but closed early at 5 p.m. and exactly at 7:30 p.m. Each day, he walked his pit bull down a narrow alley behind the shop, a shortcut leading to the parking lot behind his building. A perfect place. No streetlights, no cameras, and no witnesses. Harvey waited until Friday night, when the bars were packed and alleyways were forgotten. He chose to wear a dark hooded coat, rubber-soled shoes to make no sound, no weapons. He didn't need any. Every strike of his, honed over 22 years of Special Forces training, was a weapon in itself. When Collins entered the alley, he was on the phone, letting his dog run ahead. The pit bull didn't detect Harvey, who had remained perfectly still between two old trash bins, blending into the dark like a phantom. Only when Collins reached the red brick corner did everything begin. Harvey's first punch, a hook straight into Collins' left jaw, dropped him like a sandbag. He collapsed onto the concrete, his Glock 19 flinging from his waistband and sliding toward the wall. Harvey stomped hard on Collins' right hand. Not enough to break bones, but enough to immobilize him. "Rex was my family," Harvey growled, before landing another blow straight to the bridge of the nose. Blood burst out, mingled with Collins' stifled scream. The pit bull barked, about to charge, but Harvey turned swiftly, pulled a collapsible baton from behind his back, and struck the ground hard. The sharp metallic snap and commanding motion made the dog hesitate. It looked at its owner, then backed into a corner, whimpering. Harvey didn't want to hurt it. It, too, was an innocent creature, just like Rex. Collins tried to scream, but no word came out clearly. His face was drenched in blood. His left eye was swollen shut, jaw dislocated, teeth broken. Harvey knelt, grabbed his collar, and whispered in a hoarse, deep voice, "I once spared the lives of men like you, in Fallujah, when they raised their hands to surrender. But you don't deserve mercy." Collins tried to mutter something, his right hand twitching, but Harvey didn't strike again. He stood, kicked the gun further away, then bent down one final time. "You'll live. I want you to live. So that every morning you wake up, you'll remember you're the one who shot a loyal soul. And you're alive, not because you were lucky, but because I left you to carry that weight." Harvey pulled out his phone, turned on the flashlight, aimed it at Collins' face. Blood, tears, and mud, and took a single photo. Not to boast, but to remind him the reckoning had begun. Then he left, never looking back, leaving Collins gasping on the cold ground beside a pit bull trembling and licking its master's cheek. The next morning, the local news aired a brief report. "Police officer assaulted near dark alley, suspected robbery. Attacker's identity unknown. No cameras, no evidence. And no one knew this wasn't a robbery. This was a warning." As for Harvey, he returned home, sat on the wooden chair out on the balcony, and opened his old notebook. On the first page, the names Chapman and Collins were crossed out, but the next page was still blank. And above it, he wrote, "Expand targets. Initiate internal investigation." The culprits weren't just two street cops. There were also those who had covered for them. When Harvey's fists finished their work in the dark, he knew one thing: personal revenge wasn't enough to change an entire system. Taking down Chapman and Collins was just the surface. Beneath that lay a dense web of cover-ups, of deceit, and of those constantly shielded by blue uniforms. Harvey returned to his home in Northern Springs with a new plan, one no longer built on muscle or brute force, but on a blend of military strategy and investigative technology. First, he overhauled the entire security system around his house. 6 outdated cameras were replaced with new-generation motion sensor units, capable of high-definition night recording, all connected directly to a private, encrypted server Harvey set up in a small warehouse outside the city. Less than a week after the alley incident, Chapman and Collins, though supposedly on leave for health reasons, returned to the area near Harvey's home. They didn't know the new camera system was active. They didn't know a long-range microphone had been installed at the second-floor window. And they didn't know that every word they spoke, every step they took, was being recorded. In the 6-minute and 14-second video Harvey captured, Collins said clearly, "We just need to fabricate a bit more. One false statement is enough to put him in jail." Chapman replied, "I've already called Captain Norton. He'll handle the internal report just like last time." Harvey trimmed, edited, and secured the footage, then sent it to 3 places. Southern Equity Watch, a prominent civilian group that monitors police conduct. The digital outlet The Beacon Sun, known for its investigations into police abuse. And Breonna Dawson, his sister, is a civil rights attorney with a success rate of over 90% in federal cases. Within 24 hours of the footage reaching those recipients, a tidal wave erupted on social media. The hashtag #JusticeForRex spread with blinding speed. In just 3 hours, it hit the national top 5 trends on Twitter and TikTok. 20-second excerpts from the original video, with the caption, "They didn't just kill a dog, they killed trust," flooded Instagram Reels, garnering over 4 million views overnight. Breonna didn't stop there. She released copies of 17 prior complaints about Chapman and Collins' abusive behavior. These complaints had once been submitted to the Northern Springs Police Department, but were misplaced, lacked evidence, or simply never entered into investigation files. Harvey had retrieved backups through an old contact who once worked in administrative records, now an anonymous activist. When the recordings were posted to YouTube in detailed analysis segments, legal organizations, criminal justice professors, and former FBI agents spoke out. A coalition of civil attorneys submitted a formal request for Federal Department of Justice intervention, also demanding a full-scale investigation into the Northern Springs Police Department. The local press, which had stayed quiet during the initial days, was forced to speak. On Channel 9's 6 p.m. broadcast, the anchor opened with a definitive statement. "This is no longer a case of excessive force. This is a clear sign of a system built to protect wrongdoing." That weekend, in an unexpected press conference, Northern Springs Police Chief Eldon Prescott announced, "We are immediately suspending Officers Caradoc Chapman and Orson Collins pending investigation. Simultaneously, we've requested that the Office of Independent Oversight begin a full review of all unresolved complaints related to these individuals." Though his words sounded cooperative, Prescott's eyes, as seen through the broadcast screen, couldn't hide his concern. He knew this wouldn't stop at 2 officers. Harvey sat before his laptop, watching the live news, fingers gently wrapped around a coffee mug. The screen's glow reflected in his eyes, not with satisfaction, but with the calm of someone halfway through a long campaign. He had broken through the first wall, but many more remained, filthier and far more dangerous. And Harvey Bruce was ready. The Northern Springs District Court had never witnessed a scene like this. As early as 6 a.m., hundreds of people lined up outside the gates, many holding signs that read, "Justice for Rex," and photos of Harvey Bruce beside his dog Rex, the image that had gone viral across social media. By 8:15 a.m., every seat in courtroom 3, with a capacity of 210, was filled. 3 major TV networks, WNB5, Channel 9 News, and Morning Nation Live, all broadcast the trial live. The court permitted all proceedings to be public. This was a civil trial concerning police abuse of power, and due to its particularly serious nature, Judge Ellen Madsen had ordered all involved parties to appear in a single, full-day session. Brianna Dawson, with her hair tied high, a charcoal-colored suit, and unwavering eyes, was the first to step forward representing the plaintiff. In her hands were 4 color-coded folders. Red for video evidence, blue for medical reports, gray for police internal records, and white for community complaints. "We are not here just because a dog was shot," Brianna began, her voice ringing clearly through the silent courtroom. "We are here because the truth was distorted, because a hero was treated like a criminal, because a system believes it can suppress people in the dark, and no one will see." Brianna presented each piece of evidence as if opening a wound everyone had to witness, even if they didn't want to. The video of Collins firing at Rex was displayed on the large screen. The sharp sound of the gunshot, Harvey's scream, "No, Rex!" and the image of the dog collapsing at his feet made many attendees turn away. Next came the footage of Chapman and Collins trespassing onto Harvey's property, along with the audio recording of the two plotting to fabricate false evidence. Brianna didn't need to elaborate. What was shown spoke for itself. Harvey was called to the witness stand. He wore his old Delta Force uniform, the left breast still bearing 3 Pentagon-issued medals. The entire room rose as he walked in, except for Chapman and Collins. Harvey didn't need to raise his voice. It resonated with calm and the weight of truth. He recounted everything, from the afternoon he was stopped, Rex being shot, to being handcuffed on the cold concrete sidewalk. No embellishment, no omissions, just clear moments, like memories carved in stone. Rex wasn't a pet, he was a teammate. Harvey paused, his voice catching briefly. "I led him through the battlefields of Syria, rescuing 3 children trapped under rubble in Aleppo. He was the one who detected a landmine trap. He saved my life, and the lives of my team. And you shot him, as if he were a mere threat." Chapman bowed his head, unable to look. Collins, though his face was still swollen and bruised from their previous encounter, sat frozen, hands tightly clasped beneath the table, trembling. Brianna continued with legal arguments, outlining 14 violations of civil rights and police procedures, based on both state and federal law. She cited testimonies from 3 past victims who had been unlawfully detained by Chapman and Collins, witnesses who had never been called in previous hearings. This time, they were present, ready to testify. The prosecutor representing the police, a man named Ralph Kensington, attempted to deflect with phrases like perceived threat and procedural response. But the videos, testimonies, and medical evidence rendered all his arguments meaningless. At 3:17 p.m., after nearly 7 hours of proceedings, Judge Ellen Madsen called for a 20-minute recess to prepare the preliminary ruling. She couldn't hide her emotions after watching the video. She had once been a K-9 handler for 12 years as a police aide before attending law school. Harvey sat silently in the witness chair, hands resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the window where the afternoon sunlight poured in. For the first time in weeks, he saw no blood. He saw light. And he knew. Justice, though slow, had begun to shine. The atmosphere in the courtroom on the second day was as heavy as a suspended boulder. National media continued to follow the case closely. All eyes were on the jury, composed of 12 individuals from varied backgrounds, a high school teacher, a software engineer, and a retired former police officer. After the first day of the trial, they quietly requested to review 11 key video clips, including scenes never released to the public, provided by Harvey from his private server system. The first video, Chapman sneaking into Harvey's garden at 2:13 a.m., shining a flashlight through the windows and inspecting the camera system. He wore a uniform, but issued no search warrant. and no entry was recorded at the department. The second, longer clip showed Collins standing in front of Harvey's yard with a handgun, lightly chuckling after shooting Rex. That very sound, the short, bitter, indifferent laugh, brought one female juror to tears. She was a veterinary nurse, formerly part of a therapy dog training program for veterans with PTSD. To her, that act was not merely the killing of an animal. It was the killing of a part of a soldier's soul. The defense struggled. Their lawyer, a man named Arnold Gray, with salt and pepper hair and a deep voice, argued that Harvey was emotionally unstable due to post-war trauma, and that his excessive attachment to animals clouded his judgment of proper police conduct. He attempted to paint the picture of a mentally unstable veteran, but every piece of evidence Brianna presented only further reinforced one truth. Harvey had behaved with extraordinary restraint throughout repeated provocation, assault, and humiliation. Medical reports presented by military forensic doctor Dr. Edna Carrington showed that Rex, a certified military-grade German Shepherd, had completed 5 missions in the Middle East and was protected under Section 14, Clause 223B of the U.S. Military Code. By law, killing a military service dog during recovery, leave without immediate safety justification, is considered destruction of strategic property, carrying consequences equivalent to causing military loss. Brianna, instead of loudly objecting, simply stood and asked the jury one question. If a police officer shoots a soldier on leave, then laughs, would you call that an accident or a crime? The room was so silent. The faint breeze slipping through the window panes could be heard. After over 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The foreman, an elderly white man, a former serviceman at Fort Bragg, stood, looked directly into the eyes of Chapman and Collins, and declared, "Both defendants are found guilty on all charges: abuse of power, unlawful assault, unauthorized entry, and intentional killing of an armed forces animal." The entire courtroom held its breath. Judge Ellen Madsen leaned back, raised her gavel, and struck it down. The court sentences each defendant to 25 years in federal prison, without parole, without suspension. Collins dropped his head, face pale. Chapman, once arrogant and defiant, slumped into his seat and covered his face with both hands. Not a single word from either of them. None of their former colleagues came to defend them. The system they once believed would shield all their wrongs now sat silent as a grave. From the back row, light applause broke out. A few embraced in tears. The veterinary nurse gently placed an old leash onto the floor with the name Rex engraved on its tag as a gesture of farewell. And in the center of the room, Harvey Bruce sat motionless, his eyes quietly fixed on the image of Rex projected on the large screen. No gloating, no rage, only a conclusion to a chapter soaked in blood, and the beginning of another, where justice was no longer a distant concept. A week after the trial, light rain fell over Northern Springs. The soft drizzle touched the ground, easing the scorching heat of the past few days, as if the sky itself bowed in mourning for an immeasurable loss. Harvey Bruce quietly drove his old black Jeep, the same type he once used on the front lines, into the Southern Veterans Cemetery on the edge of town. In Section A5, reserved for military service animals, a modest gray granite headstone sat between 2 rows of small American flags. Engraved deeply by hand were the words, Rex, loyal to the end, Mosul, Raqqa, Aleppo, 2015 do 2023 below was a raised carving of a proud German Shepherd, its gaze fixed toward the distance. The artisan who crafted it was a former Marine who had also lost a combat dog named Bravo. When he handed over the headstone, he said, I don't need payment. This is my duty." Harvey stepped out of the car, carrying a small ebony box in his arms. Inside was a photograph taken in Mosul in 2015, the first mission he and Rex completed together. In the picture, both were dusty, faces smudged with gunpowder, but Harvey's smile and Rex's bright eyes could make anyone stop for a few seconds. He placed the photo in front of the headstone, beside the wildflowers Brianna had left the day before, still fresh. Then Harvey sat down, without an umbrella, letting the rain soak his faded field jacket. Not a word was spoken for the first few minutes, only the sound of wind threading through the cypress trees and the rustling of American flags in the breeze. Finally, Harvey bowed his head and said hoarsely, "I promised you I'd do the right thing. And I did." No tears. He didn't cry, because all the tears that needed to be shed, he had cried in silence through sleepless nights. Today wasn't a day of grief. Today was a day of remembrance and farewell to a warrior who never asked for medals. He told Rex about the trial, about the 25-year sentence, about how Collins trembled, how Chapman couldn't look up, about what Brianna said, and the look in the judge's eyes, not the eyes of someone delivering a verdict, but of someone who had known loss herself. He also spoke of the millions who had raised their voices, the viral hashtags, the emails from veterans across the country, saying they stood with Harvey. Some even sent old leashes, dog service medals, and maps of Iraq, where Rex had once sniffed out an ISIS tunnel. All had become part of a collective memory, not just a personal pain. And finally, he whispered, "Rex, if we ever meet again, I hope it won't be on a battlefield, but in an open field. No gunfire, no orders. I'll throw the ball, and you'll run, just like the first day." A light breeze swept by, fluttering the small flag beside the grave. Harvey stood up, placing his hand on the cold stone. Not too long, not too brief. Just enough, as if to say, "I'm heading out, teammate." As he returned to the car, he didn't look back. Not because he forgot, but because it was already carved into his heart. In the heart of a Delta soldier who had been through dozens of missions, soaked in blood and memory, he still carried a dog. Noongar alive, but forever loyal. And in the silence of that cemetery, Rex still lived. In every footprint Harvey left on the ground. In every heartbeat, no longer shaken by fear. And in every decision he would make to stand against injustice from that day on. 7 days after the historic trial, Harvey Bruce made his first appearance before national media. He didn't choose social media. He didn't hold a press conference. He accepted a single invitation from CNN's Frontline Justice, a program known for exposing major racial injustice scandals within the U.S. law enforcement system. On the large screen, Harvey sat in a simple studio with a gray backdrop, wearing a black shirt and silver tie. His face was stoic, but his eyes held depth, the gaze of someone who had crossed the line between despair and hope, pain and action. The host, veteran journalist Elaine Faust, opened with a short but piercing question. "Do you regret choosing the path of public confrontation?" Harvey paused for a few seconds. He didn't bow his head, didn't avert his eyes. Then he replied, "I don't regret it, because I didn't seek revenge. I sought justice, not just for Rex, but for people like me, who were once silenced, once disregarded, once gunned down in broad daylight while no one listened." The response went viral across platforms. Within 24 hours, the interview clip garnered 11 million views on YouTube, becoming a trending topic on Twitter X under the hashtag #JusticeIsLegacy. At the same time, Breonna Dawson Harvey, Harvey's sister, kept pushing forward. She launched a campaign titled "Clear the Blue Fog." aiming to comprehensively reform the Northern Springs Police Department. Within 2 weeks, over 1.4 million signatures were gathered on Change.org. Major donors like the Carnegie Foundation, the NAACP, and veteran groups contributed funds, fueling a special hearing at the City Council. On June 24th, exactly 30 days after Rex was killed, the Northern Springs Civic Center held a special ceremony. The entire city gathered at the central square. The elderly, children, veterans, and high school students wore shirts printed with the image of the German Shepherd, now a symbol that went beyond an animal. It had become an embodiment of awareness. At the center of the newly paved square, a 2.1-meter tall bronze statue was unveiled. It depicted Rex standing upright, alert, head held high, eyes looking forward. At the statue's base, a plaque read, "REX, loyal to the end. A dog shot down awakened an entire system." The crowd fell silent. 1 minute later, hundreds erupted into applause. A 10-year-old boy, the son of a retired police chief, took the microphone and read aloud a poem he wrote. The dog could not speak, but his death gave voice to millions of sighs once buried in the dark. Harvey stood beside the statue, not giving a speech. But when the ceremony ended, he bowed his head and placed his hand on Rex's bronze paw, just as he had at the real Rex's gravesite. He knew well, loss can never be fully compensated. But legacy, the gift left for future generations, doesn't lie in court victories, but in forcing a system to reflect and change. 3 months later, the state Senate passed the Rex Act, mandating stricter accountability for officers who use force against military animals and veterans. Breonna continued to lead the Institute for Justice System Reform, while Harvey became a senior advisor to the Veteran Justice and K-9 Partners program. And Rex, from an anonymous warrior, became the namesake of 47 dogs being trained at military centers across the U.S. No one can erase the past. But from that pain, a new future is written. Not just justice. Legacy. Harvey Bruce didn't seek pity or fame. He was living proof that some pain cannot remain silent, and some actions can make an entire system bow its head. Rex was just a dog, but his death exposed the fractures in justice, forcing people to stop pretending not to see. From punches thrown in the dark to a public courtroom, from a humble gravestone to a city center monument, Harvey proved. Justice doesn't come from belated apologies, but from the courage to never submit. And now, the question is no longer, was Harvey right? But rather, if it were you, would you stay silent or rise? What do you think of this story? Leave your comment below. We want to hear your voice. This is Black Strength Stories, where stories of power, justice, and truth are told with full respect. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next powerful story.